How you doing, guys? My name is Recommend. Welcome to my channel. So today's topic is going to be Nintendo 8-bit clones. For example, the RetroUSB AVS, which is right there behind me, if you can see, right in the wall behind me with all the games. The Hyperkin Retron 5 and the RetroBit Super Retro Trio. There's also an Ouya there, but it doesn't take physical carts, although it'll play NES games via emulation. So I'm not going to go ahead and count that because it's not a real NES clone. Let's start with the RetroBit. The RetroBit is a clone console that's a hardware clone, has a Nintendo on a chip. It does have all the, let's just say, all the audio and video outputs you would expect of an old school console. For example, you have RCA jacks, an S video and an S video jack. So meaning that you can hook it up to an old school CRT TV and some new HD TVs. Only problem is with that you will not get any kind of light gun support on the new TVs. However, if you hook it up to old school CRT, you will be able to play your light gun games such as Duck Hunt. In terms of compatibility, it plays most games just fine. The colors may be a little off, funky, depending on what your memories of them are. NES had no specific color palette because it didn't do RGB, so I guess you can say, it's not like the digital age now where everything is very precise. Back then it depended on what settings your TV had and to what colors you remember. But in terms of the hardware emulation or the hardware approximation, it's a pretty good console. Sounds a little off, that you can definitely say. Most games sound fine. A few of them you're going to hear slightly different tones and pings and things like that depending on the sound effects. But overall, it's a good console. You also get the added advantage that you can play Sega Genesis games. If you have an adapter, you can play Sega Master System games as well as Super Nintendo games, which is another awesome plus. If you have a Super Retro Advance adapter, you can play Game Boy Advance games. And if you have a Super Game Boy, you can play black and white, and actually I think just the black and white games. You can't play the Game Boy Color games. But still, that's quite a nice little setup. The console itself is about 60 to 70 bucks. And it's not a bad look. The only problem is the output, as for the most part, and some of the compatibility. Like, you can't play Paperboy. It'll start, but the problem is you can't control anything. You can't, even if I don't think you can start the game. Even if you can't control the Paperboy once you do. So it's kind of useless. Certain games, such as Castlevania 3 won't run on it. And even if you could get it to run, the music will probably be all jacked up, so forget about Castlevania 3. And there's more that I can't remember right now, but it's a very small percentage of the NES library. It's good enough for what most people want, especially with all the other consoles. And for the most part, everything plays just fine. You can play Contra. There's no lag, especially in a CRT. It's a pretty good console for what it is. Next you have the Retron 5. The Retron 5 is kind of the opposite of the Super Retro Trio in the sense that it only has HDMI, so you can only plug it into an HDTV unless you get some kind of funky adapter that takes your HDMI and down samples it back down to AV quality video. But even if you do it that way, you still won't, because of the delay in emulation and processing your signal. You can't play light gun games even if you do hook it up to a CRT. So CRT games are out. In general, you have a ton of systems you can play. The NES, you can actually play the Famicom, so you can actually play the Japanese NES cartridges because the slide is actually there. You don't need any additional adapters. It's a good console as well. It's more pricey than the Super Retro Trio. They generally run just above $100. It's somewhere between $100 and $150 depending on where you get them from. If you can find them these days, you can play Sega Genesis games as well as Super Nintendo games. Just like with the NES, you can play the Japanese counterparts, so you can play Mega Drive and Super Famicom games. It also has a slot for Game Boy Advance games that's backwards compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. So overall, it's a tidy little package. This one, however, is not a hardware console. A hardware clone. This is a software emulator. It runs emulators. It runs off Android. Android is hidden in the background there behind the menus, and it runs emulators, the same kind of emulators you can get for your phone or for your computer. It does give you pretty crisp graphics. You do get a couple of graphics options. You can add some scan lines. Interestingly enough, you can't change the color palette, which I found kind of strange because that's something they should be able to easily add. They are getting an adapter that comes out pretty soon. As of this video, within the next month, it's slated to come out. It's supposed to let you play Master System as well as Game Gear games. It's an adapter that lets you play Game Gear games basically on your Retron 5. So if you have a bunch of Game Gear games, you might enjoy that. For the most part, it works well. Some people have a problem with the dubious legality of them supposedly stealing the emulators away from authors who they didn't get permission from. But the console, at least in my defense, works well. However, if you're a gamer who's really sensitive to lag and the timing of things, this is probably not the console for you, because you will experience it. There is a slight delay no matter what console you play. Everything is still playable, but it does have a slight different feeling to it. You know what I'm talking about if you're really familiar with the game and exactly how it's supposed to control. Other than that, the software emulation does give you some cool things, like you're able to add scan lines. You can save anywhere at any time and then continue anywhere anytime. You can change. You have filters that allow you to change the look of the game, which is pretty cool. But these are all things you can get on your computer for free. But the added benefit of this is that you can actually use your actual cartridges if you like, and at minimum you can dump the saves from your cartridges onto the Retron. Like, say you think your battery's about to die on your 30-year-old game. You know, it's amazing that they even last that long. And it has to have some games going strong. But anyway, what you can do is you can dump your save, change the battery, especially if you have the skill for that, and then put the save back onto the cartridge. So that's probably the biggest advantage the Retron has over any other the clone consoles. But overall, it's a decent it's a decent option. You know, you have a lot because of the fact you have a lot of systems in there. But in terms, if you're a casual gamer, you'll probably enjoy it. Just the only thing is, of course, with all these clone consoles, is you're gonna have to actually buy the cartridges, which are pretty expensive these days. They're not cheap. The next option is the RetroUSB AVS. The RetroUSB AVS is a hardware clone console as well of the actual NES. The NES is the only the only console that is cloning. There's no other options. There's no other slots for any other consoles except for the Famicom, which is the Japanese NES, and you can play those games. But in terms of the AVS, it's not a Nintendo on a chip like the Super Retro Trio is. This is actually an FPGA, field programmable gate array, which means it's basically, just imagine it's like a transformer chip. So basically it's a chip that can pretend to be other chips, with the right programming, of course. So once you have that, it pretty much, since it thinks it's the actual chip, it does everything the actual, like the way the original console is supposed to. So it eliminates the lag. It only has HDMI output on it, meaning that you can only hook it up to an HDTV, and like the Retron 5, you can always attach some kind of an adapter to downgrade the signal and plug it to a CRT. However, it will not let you play light gun games either. So just something to keep in mind. You can change the color palettes, you can add scan lines to it, which is awesome for those people that are into that, and the emulation quality is actually pretty good. However, don't let them fool you. They have their own issues, you know. Though they've admitted to them, they don't exactly advertise them. I guess, you know, it's a little. I find that a little bit to be a little bit shady, but they are claiming that they're going to fix them. So if they do, if they do, you know, they'll definitely get some big thumbs up from me. But the issues that I've experienced with it, the main one is some games have a green strip at the bottom. It's kind of hard to explain. If you have a copy of Dragon Warrior, Bubble Bobble, Burger Time, Back to the Future, Tetris, Nintendo's Tetris, you may have an affected copy. Not every copy of a certain title will have that green strip, just some of them do. So if you look at the pins, you're going to see that like the pins don't come out, or they don't extend all the way out to the end of the cartridge. It's like a green strip there. Because of this green strip, the connector on the AVS does not read the cartridge correctly. It has a hard time reading the cartridge, and that's a problem because You know, it's a $170 console. There's no reason that this should have been overlooked. I mean, it was played. I'm sure it was tested. I mean, Bubble Bob was a pretty popular game, so I don't know how that was missed. But anyway, the good thing is that they're supposedly going to replace that pin connector. That's easy to replace yourself, and that those parts should be going out sometime soon. Of course, there's no date. Nothing has been guaranteed or written in stone. So I'm going to have to take RetroUSB's word for it. The other thing is my copy of Final Fantasy 7 doesn't work. If you look, it's probably my first or second video. If you look at it, Final Fantasy 7 will not work on the RetroUSB AVS even to this day, even with the beta firmware updates. I had the latest one, which is 8, that came out a couple of days ago. It seems to be getting worse every time they update the console instead of better for some strange reason. So what happens is the graphics are corrupt and it will destroy your save. So if you're far in the game and you enjoy Final Fantasy 7, do not test it on the RetroUSB AVS until they give it a thumbs up in some way. However, that game does work on. It actually works on the Super Retro Trio. It won't work on the Retron 5, at least in my case, unless I do there's a trick for the Retron 5 where you can use IPS files and IPS patching, and you can play any ROM that you like. So, kind of becomes, I guess it lives up to its emulation machine promise in that sense. You can play any game on it if you know how to do it. But overall, as you see, you know, from what I'm telling you guys here, none of these consoles are perfect. None of the clones are perfect. Each one has their strengths and their weaknesses. So to reiterate a little bit, Super Retro Trio plays a whole lot of consoles, light guns, but unfortunately it's limited to analog only. No HDMI, right? No menu. But the good part about no menu is you turn it on and you play. That's it. Simple as that. So simplicity is both a strength and a weakness for the Super Retro Trio. The Retron 5, more complex, no analog for those that want to play on CRTs, and it's an emulation system, so it introduces more lag. Then you have the RetroUSB AVS, no lag, but it's pricier than the others and doesn't support light guns, and also has the issue with the connectors and certain games such as Final Fantasy 7. So just wanted to give you guys this overview. This video is actually going on 12 minutes now, almost 13 minutes. I should be getting an NES Classic sometime soon in the future, which is another NES clone, technically anyway, from Nintendo themselves. It does have its own strengths and weaknesses. I'll probably go over that pretty soon, but just wanted to have a little conversation with you guys about what I collect and NES clones, alright? In the meanwhile, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to rate, thumbs up, and subscribe, and share the video with your friends. I need some more people on my channel, alright? Have a good one, guys. Peace.